When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, almost uncertain. "Do you think Mom would be proud of me if I did this?" I thought about Isabella, about her ability to spot potential and demand more from people than they thought if they could give. "I think she'd be proud of you for trying," I said. "That's all she ever wanted, for you to earn the life you want, not just inherit it." There was a long pause. Then, "Okay, I'll think about it." It wasn't a commitment, but it wasn't a refusal either. When we hung up, I sat in the stillness of my apartment, the phone cooling in my hand. This was the first crack in the wall between us in over a decade. Whether it led to something better or closed shut again would be up to her. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than exhaustion. I felt possibility. After we hung up, I sat back in my worn recliner, staring at the quiet apartment around me. It had been barely 2 months since I got the phone call telling me Isabella was gone. In that short time, my life had been upended in ways I couldn't have imagined. I now controlled more wealth than I'd ever dreamed of, but that was the smallest part of what had changed. The real shift was in how I saw my responsibility. Isabella hadn't just left me money or a company. She'd left me her unfinished work, not in the market, but at home. She'd asked me to do for Brooke what she hadn't been able to. Teach her that the world doesn't hand out value just because you demand it. That the things worth having, trust, respect, purpose, have to be earned. And I realized something. My job now wasn't to make Brooke like me. It wasn't to buy her affection or smooth over a decade of anger with gifts. My job was to stand firm in the values Isabella had trusted me to pass on, even if Brooke hated me for it in the short term. Because one day, maybe, she'd understand. I glanced, over at the stack of reports from Chen Morgan Technologies. The company was thriving, not just financially, but in spirit. Isabella's fingerprints were all over it. The generous family leave policy, the profit-sharing program, the scholarships for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. She'd built something that mattered, and she'd trusted me to keep it alive. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace with where my life had landed, not because it was easy, but because I finally knew what I was meant to do. Brooke's path forward was hers to choose. She could take the money she had left and spend it in a year, or she could take the harder road, the one her mother and I had both walked, and build something she could call her own. Either way, my door would stay open, not as a safety net for when she stumbled, but as a place she could return to when she was ready to stand on her own. In the end, that's what inheritance really is. Not the money, not the assets, but the values you leave behind and the hope that the next generation will pick them up and carry them further than you ever could. And for the first time in over a decade, I felt like maybe, just maybe, Brooke and I still had a chance. "I want to make things right between us," she continued. "I want to be a family again." I stayed quiet, letting her fill the silence. "I know I said terrible things. Accused you of awful things. I was grieving and confused. I didn't mean—" She trailed off. And then, as if on cue, the real reason emerged. "I need your help, Dad. I lost my job when the lawsuit became public. My apartment applications keep getting rejected. I'm running out of money, and I don't know what to do." There it was, the hook beneath the sentiment. I thought about all I'd learned over the past few weeks, about leadership, about human nature, about how often people confuse an opportunity for growth with a lifeline they don't intend to repay. "I understand you're struggling," I said gently, "but before we talk about help, we need to set some ground rules." "Anything," she said quickly. "I'll do anything to fix this relationship." "First," I said, "you need to get a job. Not management, not an executive role. An entry-level position where you earn your way up. No family money, no shortcuts." Silence. "Dad," she said finally, "I have an MBA. I worked at Mom's company for 3 years." "Working for your mother isn't the same as building something yourself," I replied. "Isabella wanted you to learn responsibility. That starts with earning your own way." Her tone tightened. "That's not fair. I shouldn't have to start over like some college graduate. Your mother started over more than once. She waited tables to pay for college. She took out loans for her first business. She earned everything she achieved. This is punishment," she snapped. "You're enjoying this." "No," I said. "This is education. The kind your mother tried to give you, but you didn't want to hear. Another pause. This one was longer. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller. I don't know how to do that. I've never been without money or connections. I've never been on my own. Then it's time you learned, I said quietly. Your mother left you enough for a fresh start. Use it wisely. Brooke, I said, keeping my voice steady, if we're going to rebuild anything between us, it has to start with trust. And trust is built on action, not words. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, she replied quickly. But I could hear the urgency in her tone, the kind born from desperation, not conviction. Then here are the terms, I said. You find a job, any honest job. It doesn't matter if it's answering phones, stocking shelves, or working the counter at a coffee shop. Something where you clock in and out, where you're accountable to someone who doesn't care about your last name. She inhaled sharply, as if I'd just suggested something unthinkable. Dad, I've got an MBA. I worked alongside Mom for years. This is beneath me. No, Brooke, I said evenly. It's beneath the person you've been acting like, but it's not beneath the person you could become. Silence stretched between us. This isn't about humiliating you, I continued. It's about giving you the same foundation your mother built her success on. Resilience, discipline, and self-reliance. She didn't hand me those values. I learned them the hard way, and she wanted you to learn them too. Her voice softened, but there was still an edge. And if I do this, if I get some entry-level job and work like I've never had to before, then what? Then we talk again, I said. We start slowly. Coffee once a week. Real conversations, not fights. And maybe, in time, I bring you into the company. But only if you've proven you can contribute without leaning on your title or your bloodline. That could take years, she said, almost to herself. It might, I agreed. But if you're serious about changing, you'll see it as an investment, not a sentence. Let the silence return. This time, she didn't rush to fill it. Her legal team was exactly what I expected. 3 sharply dressed litigators who radiated confidence and billable hours. When we walked into federal court for the first hearing, the air felt charged, heavy with the kind of tension that only comes when family grievances are about to be aired in public. Your Honor, her lead attorney began, we contend that Michael Morgan exploited the guilt of his former wife through promises of reconciliation, securing control over her estate through manipulation and deceit. I sat there listening, feeling each word land like a punch. The truth? I would have given anything for reconciliation with Isabella. But the last time we spoke more than 2 sentences to each other was years before her death. Sterling stood, his tone calm but unyielding. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mr. Morgan had no knowledge of the provisions in Mrs. Chen Morgan's will. They were drafted with multiple witnesses, notarized, and accompanied by a recorded video testament in which she explicitly explained her reasoning. He produced documents, phone records showing no contact between Isabella and me, medical evaluations proving her mental clarity, financial records detailing how she'd been planning this distribution for over a year. Then came the video. Isabella appeared on the courtroom's monitor, seated in a well-lit office, speaking with the same measured confidence she used in business meetings. I am leaving the majority of my estate to Michael because he was the foundation that allowed me to dream, she said directly into the camera. I trust him to guide our daughter toward earning her place in the world. Brooke's composure cracked. She whispered something to her attorney, shaking her head furiously. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a voice that brooked no nonsense, listened to both sides for 2 hours. Then she delivered her ruling. The petition is denied. This will demonstrate clear intent, proper execution, and legal validity. The claims of fraud and undue influence are not supported by the evidence. It was over, at least legally. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Brooke ignored me, sweeping past with her lawyers, the click of her heels sharp against the concrete. I didn't feel victorious. The truth had won, yes, but we were still a broken family. Isabella was still gone, and the chasm between Brooke and me felt wider than ever. Sterling placed a hand on my shoulder. Now the real work begins, he said. He was right. The court case had settled the question of ownership, but running Isabella's company, and living up to the trust she'd placed in me, was an entirely different challenge. It had been a month since the court's ruling. I was sitting in my Queens apartment, reading quarterly reports from Chen Morgan Technologies, still wrapping my head around what it meant to be responsible for an operation that spanned 3 continents. The work was intimidating, but it also felt purposeful. I'd begun to understand why Isabella had poured herself into it. That's when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me pick up. Dad. The voice was hesitant, softer than I remembered. It took me a moment to realize it was Brooke. It's Brooke. Could we talk? It had been weeks since I'd last seen her storm out of the courthouse, all fire and fury. Now her tone was stripped of that edge, replaced by something closer to the daughter I used to know. Of course, I said slowly. What's on your mind? There was a pause, and then the words came in a rush. I was wrong. About everything. About you. About the will. About Mom's decisions. I've had time to think, and I realize I was just hurt. And scared. Her voice caught. See on the word scared, but I'd been around long enough to know that emotion can be as much a tool as a truth. The drumming stopped. Brooke's confident expression faltered. Wait, that's it? She blurted. What about the company, the investments, the rest of the estate? Sterling didn't look up. To Michael Morgan, my former husband, I leave the remainder of my estate, including all business interests, real property, excluding the Fifth Avenue apartment, investment accounts, and liquid assets totaling approximately $55.5 million. The room went silent, except for the faint hum of the building's ventilation. I gripped the edge of the table, certain I'd misheard. 55 million? Brooke shot to her feet, her face draining of color. There has to be a mistake. Mom would never... She couldn't. There is more, Sterling said, turning a page. I also leave Michael full operational control of Chen Morgan Technologies, trusting his practical wisdom to guide the company's future growth. My heart thudded in my chest. It wasn't just money. It was responsibility for Isabella's life's work. Sterling continued reading, his voice steady but carrying weight. Michael, you were always my foundation, the stable ground beneath my ambitious dreams. I failed you as a wife, but I never forgot your loyalty during our hardest years. I'm asking you to do what I couldn't. Teach our daughter the value of earning what she receives. He shifted his gaze to Brooke. My darling daughter, you have intelligence and potential, but you've never learned to build from struggle. $500,000 is enough to start any life you choose, if you choose wisely. Your father can teach you what I failed to, that the most valuable things must be earned, not inherited. The silence that followed was thick, almost oppressive. Brooke's eyes were wide, her lips trembling before she managed to speak. This is insane, she snapped. Fraudulent. He must have coerced her. Bribed you? This will isn't real. Miss Morgan, Sterling replied calmly. This will was prepared with multiple witnesses, notarized documentation, and video testimony from your mother. The security protocols make fraud impossible. Brooke's voice sharpened to a blade. I worked with her. I understood the business. He's never even seen the inside of a boardroom. You think he can run the company? This is my inheritance. I found my voice, though it felt foreign. Brooke, I had no idea. I haven't spoken to your mother in a decade, except for a few Christmas cards. She made this decision on her own. Lies, she shouted. Sterling cleared his throat. Your mother specifically requested that Michael be given a comprehensive transition period with the existing management team. She wanted him to understand the business before making any decisions. Brooke's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. This won't stand. I'll file a lawsuit tomorrow. I'll expose this for what it is. She snatched her purse and stormed toward the door, pausing just long enough to throw one last dagger over her shoulder. Enjoy your moment, Dad. It won't last. When I'm done, you'll be lucky to keep that apartment in Queens. The door slammed behind her, leaving the echo hanging in the air like a final insult. Sterling and I sat in silence for a long moment. Then he said quietly, Mr. Morgan, I think you should know exactly what you've inherited. And I knew. This was only the beginning. It didn't take long for Brooke to make good on her threat. Within a week, Sterling called to inform me that her attorneys had filed motions claiming undue influence, mental incapacity, and fraud. The words looked clinical on paper, but I knew what they meant. She was accusing me of manipulating a dying woman for money. The voice behind me was sharp enough to cut glass. I turned and saw Brooke, her expression a mix of disdain and calculated performance. "Dad, the caring father, gracing us with his presence at last," she said, projecting her words just loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. "Brooke? Save it," she snapped. 10 years of silence, and now you crawl out for the funeral? How thoughtful." She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor, and then, with deliberate precision, hooked her foot around my ankle. My balance faltered, and I went sprawling across the aisle, the sound of my umbrella clattering echoing in the silent chapel. Gasps spread through the room. A few guests pulled out their phones. I could almost feel the judgment being recorded in real time. I rose slowly, brushing off my suit, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me flustered. "I deserved some of that," I said quietly, "but your mother deserved better than this circus." For a flicker of a second, something shifted in her expression. Surprise, maybe even regret, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Then, Robert Sterling, the attorney who had called me the day before, stepped forward. "Mr. Morgan, we need to discuss your late wife's will. You've been named, and your presence is required tomorrow." I saw Brooke's smirk falter again. "What will?" she demanded. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Sterling said. "Both of you are required to attend the reading tomorrow at 2 p.m. Brooke turned to me, her voice rising again for the audience's benefit. "You destroyed our lives. Mom rebuilt everything without you, and she died from the stress. You don't belong here." I kept my voice low, steady. "I'm here to pay my respects." "Respect?" she scoffed. "Where was your respect when you walked out on a 9-year-old? The funeral director finally intervened, stepping between us. "Miss Sir, this is not the time or place." Brooke's glare never left my face. "Fine, but this conversation isn't over." She turned on her heel and walked toward the waiting black sedan, her posture radiating triumph. Sterling approached me again, pressing a gold-lettered business card into my hand. "The reading is at our Manhattan office. Please arrive promptly." I slipped the card into my pocket, feeling the weight of it. Whatever Isabella had done in her final days, it had been important enough to pull me, and my furious daughter, into the same room again. And something told me tomorrow was going to shock us both. Sterling Hayes Associates occupied the 23rd floor of a midtown Manhattan tower, all glass, mahogany, and quiet wealth. Even the air seemed expensive. I arrived exactly at 2 p.m., wearing the best shirt I owned and the tie I'd bought years earlier for Brooke's high school graduation, the last family milestone I'd been allowed to attend. Brooke swept in 5 minutes later, commanding the space like she already owned it. The black suit she wore probably cost more than my monthly rent. She didn't sit next to me. Instead, she chose the chair across the long conference table, placing a sleek designer bag at her side. "Punctual as always, Dad," she said flatly. "Ready for your consolation prize?" Sterling entered then, carrying a thick folder. His voice was calm, professional, with the faintest trace of formality meant to keep things orderly. "Thank you both for coming. Isabella's will is comprehensive, so please allow me to read it in full before asking questions." Brooke crossed her legs, drumming manicured fingers against the table, eyes bright with expectation. Sterling began with the legal preamble, declarations of sound mind, revocation of previous wills, appointment of executors. Then he reached the first bequest, to my beloved dog. "Terror, Brooke Morgan, I leave my apartment on 5th Avenue, all personal effects contained therein, and the sum of $500,000. I laughed bitterly. "I supported your dreams for 15 years. I gave up promotions, weekends, sleep. I worked myself into the ground so you could build this empire. And now you're telling me you found someone who understands you better?" "You were supportive," she said, her voice growing sharper. "But you never felt the passion I felt. David and I, we share something deeper." "Deeper?" My voice broke. "We shared a life, a child, 15 years of marriage, but apparently none of that compares to your business partner's understanding of quarterly reports." The doorway shifted. Brooke was standing there, her face confused and frightened. "Why are you yelling? What's happening?" "Daddy's upset about work stress," Isabella said quickly, slipping into protective mother mode. "Everything's fine." But nothing was fine. In the weeks that followed, Isabella moved into the guest bedroom. We tried counseling, but her heart wasn't in it. She spoke about David with a reverence she once reserved for our marriage. He was her equal, her intellectual match, the partner who could understand her in ways I apparently never had. By 2013, divorce papers were in motion. The process dragged into the next year, bitter and exhausting. Isabella got primary custody of Brooke, kept the Westchester house, and retained control of her recovered company. I moved into a small apartment in Queens. I saw Brooke every other weekend under arrangements that felt more like parole visits than time with my own daughter. She blamed me entirely for the breakup. In her mind, I was the one who left, the one who abandoned her. Isabella never corrected her. The last day I spent in the house was a wet, gray afternoon. Brooke stayed at a friend's to avoid the awkwardness. I packed my clothes and a few personal items into cardboard boxes while Isabella worked behind the closed door of her office. When I loaded the final box into my car, I stood for a moment in the driveway, staring at the windows glowing with warm light. The home we'd built together now belonged entirely to her world, a world I was no longer part of. I drove away knowing I'd lost more than a marriage. I'd lost the identity I'd carried for almost 2 decades, husband, father, partner, and I didn't know if I'd ever get any piece of it back. For the next 10 years, I didn't. Until the day I stood at her funeral, face to face with the daughter who had grown into a stranger, and realized that my name was about to be pulled into Isabella's life one final time. The rain was steady that afternoon, a cold drizzle that slicked the cobblestone paths of Greenwood Cemetery. Black umbrellas dotted the grounds, forming a dark canopy over Isabella's mourners. From the edge of the chapel, I watched the people who had filled her life after mine, polished executives, investors, colleagues in tailored suits and designer coats. 10 years had passed since I'd last seen my daughter. Now, she stood at the front, tall, poised, wearing a fitted black dress and the same air of confidence her mother had perfected. But there was something else, a hardness in her eyes, as if the little girl I once knew had been replaced entirely by the woman Isabella had raised without me. I approached slowly, unsure if I'd be welcomed or told to leave. A few faces turned my way, some whispering, others openly staring. I could imagine the stories running through their minds. The ex-husband who had abandoned his family, the man who didn't belong here. When I reached the casket, I found a moment of private silence. Isabella looked peaceful, younger somehow, the lines of stress smoothed away. I touched the edge of the polished wood and whispered, "I'm sorry for all the ways we failed each other. Look who decided to show up." Overnight, our comfortable middle-class life became a scramble for survival. Isabella's 12-employee company faced bankruptcy. Contracts vanished. Investors stopped returning calls. My executive position, the one I had worked in for 6 years, disappeared in a round of budget cuts. Within a month, I was taking whatever work I could find. Construction jobs at dawn, kitchen prep shifts on weekends, warehouse labor that left my back aching for days. Isabella buried herself in the office, working 20-hour days. When I brought her sandwiches, I'd find her surrounded by empty energy drink cans and crumpled notes, eyes red from staring at code and spreadsheets. "You need to eat something," I'd say, setting the plate beside her. "I can't stop now," she'd snap without looking up. "Every minute I'm not working, we're losing money we don't have." Brooke was 9 then. She started spending afternoons at a neighbor's house because neither of us was home. Our babysitter became more of a parent than we were, helping with homework, making dinner, tucking her into bed while we fought invisible fires. One rare night when we all sat down together, Brooke asked, "Why don't we go to the movies anymore?" "Because movies cost money we don't have," Isabella said sharply, slamming her fork down. "Everything costs money." I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Don't," she said. "I have 3 investor calls tonight." By 2010, we'd sold Isabella's engagement ring, my motorcycle, most of our furniture. The house felt hollow, echoes where laughter used to be. The company survived, barely, but we were strangers sharing an address. Conversations were reduced to logistics, Brooke's schedule, bills, emergencies. The warmth that had carried us through college dreams and early parenthood was gone, replaced by a kind of polite detachment. We passed each other in hallways without touching. Meals were taken separately. The sound of her office door closing had become the soundtrack of my evenings. And beneath the exhaustion, a dangerous quiet had settled in, the kind that comes before something breaks completely. I should have recognized it. I should have seen that it wasn't just the economy that was collapsing. But I didn't. Not until the day I opened her laptop and saw the email that would change everything. It happened on a quiet Sunday in March 2012. Brooke was at a friend's house. Isabella was in the shower. I was looking for our insurance policy information, and her laptop was the fastest way to find it. The screen was already awake when I lifted the lid. An email was open. I didn't mean to read it, not at first, but a few words caught my eye and froze me in place. Last night was perfect, Bella. I can't stop thinking about your laugh. The way you looked at me. I love you. The name at the bottom was David Chen, her business partner. My hands began to shake as I scrolled. Weeks of messages, months, conversations about stolen lunches and late nights in her office. Details that left no doubt. This had gone far beyond a professional relationship. "What are you doing on my computer?" Her voice came from behind me, sharp and defensive. I turned slowly. The laptop screen still glowed with the words I couldn't unsee. Who exactly is David, and why is he writing love letters to my soul? Her face went pale, then flushed red. "Michael, I can explain." "Explain what? That while I was working 3 jobs to keep us afloat, you were falling in love with someone else? How long has this been going on?" My voice was rising despite my effort to control it. "It's not what you think," she said, grabbing for the laptop. I held it out of reach. "David understands what I'm going through with the company," she snapped. "He gets my dreams, my stress." We adapted quickly to the chaos of parenthood. I took night feedings so Isabella could rest before her marathon coding sessions. She took over in the afternoons so I could get home from work and spend time with Brooke. It was exhausting, but we were still a team. Meanwhile, Isabella's vision had sharpened. Her cloud-based project management software wasn't just a good idea, it was ahead of its time. In '99, working remotely was rare, but she saw the shift coming. "The internet is going to change everything," she told investors late at night. "Location will no longer define opportunity." By Brooke's first birthday, Isabella had secured seed funding and hired 2 employees, ISADs. Our garage transformed into a mini office, with multiple computer stations and a whiteboard packed with deadlines and feature lists. I still remember the night she showed me her first quarterly revenue report. "We're really doing this," she said, eyes wide. I kissed her forehead. "I never doubted you." Those were good years. She ran her growing company. I managed a steady job in logistics. My income kept the household stable, paying the mortgage, covering expenses, and giving her room to take business risks. On weekends, we were just parents, park visits, birthday parties, quiet evenings watching movies with a sleeping toddler between us on the couch. Her company began attracting real attention by the mid-2000s. A contract with a mid-sized marketing agency opened doors to other industries. Suddenly, she was flying to conferences in San Francisco, London, and Tokyo. She'd come home with stories about new partnerships and emerging technologies, always brimming with ideas for the next big feature. She was building something extraordinary, but it was more than just software. She fostered a culture that mirrored her college dreams, a workplace where innovation thrived without crushing the people who made it possible. She offered flexible hours, profit sharing, and insisted her team take real vacations. At home, she was still the Isabella I knew. We celebrated each business milestone with quiet dinners, and she never missed Brooke's school plays or birthdays. I like to think we'd figured out the balance, that you could chase big dreams without losing your footing at home. There's a certain danger in believing everything is secure. You stop looking for cracks because you're too busy admiring the structure you've built. And in those moments of confidence, the first fractures can form without you noticing. In 2007, Isabella's company had 12 employees and contracts on 3 continents. Investors were circling for a larger funding round. We started talking about moving to a bigger house, maybe taking a long overdue family vacation. Looking back now, that was the high watermark, the peak before the tide began to shift. Because in less than a year, the world economy would collapse, and the foundation we'd built our lives on would be tested in ways neither of us saw coming. The first signs were small enough to ignore: a delayed payment from a client in Chicago, an investor who postponed a meeting, citing market uncertainty. We brushed them off, telling ourselves they were temporary blips in an otherwise steady climb. Then, in September 2008, the news turned grim. Banks failing, markets in free fall, the words global financial crisis flashing on every screen. I came downstairs one morning to find Isabella at the kitchen table, laptop open, coffee untouched. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, but she wasn't typing. 7% of our clients just canceled their contracts, she said quietly, eyes fixed on the screen. The funding we were counting on, it's gone. I remember standing there, still in my work shirt, feeling a weight settle in my chest. We'll figure it out, I told her. But deep down, I knew we were about to be pulled into something we couldn't control. I told her my dreams too, though they felt modest in comparison. A steady job, maybe managing a small company one day, marriage, kids. She didn't laugh. Instead, she said, "You'd be amazing at management. You actually listen to people. That's rarer than you think." From then on, we were inseparable. Study sessions turned into walks across campus. I'd point out practical challenges to her ideas. She'd push me to dream bigger. We balanced each other in ways that felt natural. Her ambition soared. Mine kept us grounded. Our first kiss happened under the cherry trees outside the student union. She'd been talking about an internship interview, and I'd stopped listening entirely, caught up in the way the light caught strands of her hair. She caught me staring. "Are you even paying attention to me?" She laughed. "Always," I whispered. And then we were kissing, tentative at first, then deeper, like we'd both been waiting for this exact moment. By senior year, her business plans were more than napkin sketches. She had market research, financial projections, and a clear vision. We made our own plan. She'd launch her company. I'd work in a stable job to provide security. "We'll be a team," she said one night, our fingers laced together as we walked through Boston Common. "Your steady mind keeps my big ideas from floating away. My ambition will make sure you don't settle for less than you deserve." Graduation day was warm and golden. We posed in our caps and gowns, grinning like we already owned the future. That night, in the same campus cafe where we'd shared our first coffee, I dropped to one knee with my grandmother's gold ring in my hand. "Isabella Chen," I said, voice shaking, "you've made me braver, smarter, and happier than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me?" Her yes came with tears and laughter, and in that moment, I believed we were unstoppable. 6 months later, we were married in a small ceremony at her parents' house. Nothing extravagant, just family, close friends, and vows we meant with our whole hearts. Our first home was a modest 2-story in Westchester, complete with a small garden and enough space for the family we planned to build. She claimed the sunny corner room as her business planning space. I set up a workshop in the basement where I could tinker with furniture projects. We had our routines, mornings together over coffee and the newspaper, evenings spent with her sketching ideas at the kitchen table while I cooked. One night, while I stirred pasta sauce, she leaned over her papers and said, "What if my efficiency software could integrate with payroll systems? Small businesses would love that. Then you should make it happen," I told her. "It would save them time and money." She jumped up to kiss me. "Michael, that's brilliant. You always see the practical applications I miss." In those early years, we were building 2 things at once, a marriage and a vision. They seemed inseparable back then, like roots growing from the same soil. We didn't know that one day those roots would be tested and nearly torn apart by storms we couldn't yet imagine. When Isabella discovered she was pregnant in early '99, it felt like the final piece of our perfect puzzle. We'd just finished turning the spare bedroom into a nursery, pale yellow walls, shelves lined with stuffed animals, and a crib that took me 2 frustrating evenings to assemble. Isabella had insisted on working right up to her due date, determined to launch her company's beta version before motherhood changed our schedules for us ever. Brooke arrived on a crisp October morning after 12 hours of labor. She was tiny but fierce, with a set of lungs that could have reached the next county. Isabella cradled her like she was holding the future itself. "He's going to change the world," she whispered. "Just like her mother," I told her. "I understand this is a shock, Mr. Morgan," Sterling said gently. "The family held a private service yesterday." He hesitated, as if deciding whether to go further. "However, there's another matter. Isabella left a comprehensive will, and you were mentioned prominently in her estate planning. The reading is tomorrow at 2 p.m., and your presence is specifically requested." I barely remembered ending the call. My body just went through the motions. Sitting down at the kitchen table, staring at the mess on the floor without seeing it. The coffee dripped steadily from the counter edge, each drop marking the seconds between the life I knew and the one that was now unfolding. I wandered into the living room, drawn toward the shelves I hadn't touched in years. There, under a thin layer of dust, was a leather-bound photo album. My hands opened it without conscious thought. The first page stopped me cold. Isabella at 21, hair dark and glossy, caught in the sunlight on the Boston University campus, laughing at something I'd said. Back then, her smile was unguarded, free of the polish and steel she would later wear like armor in boardrooms. I traced the edge of the photo. I remembered the first time I had approached her in the library, clutching a failing midterm in supply and demand curves, like it was my death sentence. She'd looked up from her textbook with those warm brown eyes, smiled and said, "Sure, I'll help you, but you're buying in the coffee." That first coffee had lasted 4 hours. We talked about everything. Her dreams of using technology to revolutionize business, my simpler hopes for a steady career and a family. She'd believed in me back then, and I'd believed in her, enough to tie my life to hers. But that was decades ago. Since then, there had been love, yes, but also betrayal, silence, and the kind of distance you can't measure in miles. Now, with a single phone call, she was gone, and for reasons I couldn't yet understand, she'd pulled me back into her story at the very end. I didn't know what to expect from that will. A token gesture, maybe, a polite nod to the years we'd shared, nothing more. But as I closed the album and set it back on the shelf, I couldn't shake the feeling that something far bigger was waiting for me tomorrow. It was 95, and the economics section of the Boston University Library was the one place I usually avoided. Towering shelves lined with intimidating titles, each spine promising hours of confusion. That day, though, I forced myself through the double doors. My midterm had come back with a big red D on it, and I was out of options. She was there, Isabella Chen, exactly where rumor said she always was, tucked into a corner table, highlighter moving methodically across the page, the kind of focus that made the rest of the world disappear. Everyone knew her, the brilliant, ambitious economics student whose professors called on her like a secret weapon. I stood there for a solid 30 seconds, clutching my exam like a hall pass to a place I didn't belong. Finally, I managed, "Excuse me, could you help me understand supply and demand curves? I'm completely lost." She looked up, and that's when it happened. That first flicker of connection. Her eyes were warm brown, intelligent, and kind. A small smile tugged at her mouth. "Sure," she said, closing her book with deliberate care, "but only if you buy me coffee afterward. Good tutoring requires caffeine." We left the library together an hour later and didn't come back for 4 more. That coffee turned into the first of 1,000 conversations. She told me about her dream, one so big it barely fit in the 999s. She wanted to create software that would transform the way businesses worked together, something that would make organizations more human and more efficient. Back then, the internet was a novelty for most people. To Isabella, it was a frontier waiting to be conquered. "Don't count on getting a penny of Mom's 56 million. Her words were delivered with the precision of a knife, each syllable sharp enough to draw blood. Brooke didn't whisper it in a corner. She said it with a smirk, chin high and loud enough for the entire cluster of black-clad mourners to hear. Heads turned. A few gasps rippled through the crowd, like someone had just smashed a stained glass window in the middle of Sunday service. I'd already been fighting the knot in my chest since I stepped into the chapel. Seeing my ex-wife's face lying still in that polished casket was hard enough. But facing the daughter I hadn't spoken to in 10 years, that was a different kind of pain. Raw, jagged, and public. Brooke didn't stop there. She tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowed in mock pity. "Oh, don't look so shocked, Dad. Mom made it clear to me, and to everyone who actually mattered, that you wouldn't see a cent, not after what you did. It was the kind of moment that freezes time. You hear the words, but the weight of them lands a few seconds later, and when it does, it doesn't just hurt. It burns." My jaw tightened, but I didn't answer, not yet. The chapel was too quiet, the air too heavy. I could feel eyes on me, assessing, judging, already deciding whose side they were on without knowing a single fact. The smell of lilies mixed with the faint scent of rain from outside. People were watching this little drama unfold as if it were part of the service. Brooke, my own flesh and blood, seemed to relish it. The performance, the power, the moral high ground she thought she owned. She stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to make me lean in. You walked out on us, remember? You left Mom to carry everything. She rebuilt without you, she earned that money, and tomorrow I'll inherit it. She let the last sentence hang in the air like a challenge. I should have kept away, but before I could take a step, the attorney, a tall man with a careful voice, approached. Mr. Morgan, he said, we need to speak about your late wife's will. You've been named, and your presence is required tomorrow. For the first time since I arrived, Brooke's smile faltered, just for a second. And in that flicker of uncertainty, I knew tomorrow was going to be nothing like she expected. The morning it happened began like any other, or at least it tried to. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee, leaning against the kitchen counter, when my favorite ceramic mug slipped from my fingers. It exploded against the tile, coffee spreading across the floor like a slow-motion crime scene. I muttered under my breath, bending to pick up the pieces, when the phone rang. Not a casual, midday sort of ring. The insistent, sharp tone that makes you feel something is already wrong before you even answer. I grabbed the receiver. Michael Morgan speaking. A man's voice came through, measured and formal. Mr. Morgan, this is Robert Sterling of Sterling Hayes and Associates. I represent your former wife, Isabella Chen Morgan. He paused, not for breath, but because what he was about to say required it. I'm afraid I have some unfortunate information. The words felt heavy before I even knew what they were. What kind of information? Isabella passed away 3 days ago. Sudden cardiac arrest. For a second, my brain refused to connect the syllables into something real. Dead. Isabella. The woman I once thought I'd grow old with. The mother of my only child. Gone at just 50 years old. I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles whitened. The sunlight streaming through the window felt almost offensive in its normalcy. That can't be right, I heard myself say. She was healthy. My voice trailed off.